A ludicrous, baseless statement from the mouths of nihilists and critics who have yet to hold a brush. What is real art, and the consideration of such has been debated since paint touched canvas, as one could argue, and by God, to the end of time, the legitimacy of anything that possesses creative elements. Such is the use of critics. But to continuously regurgitate the death of art as a definitive act, what does it imply, and who has the jurisdiction to proclaim it dead? To think of art as something mortal, a linear figure that has beginning and end, is this not an injustice to the boundlessness that is creation? Just as declaring it dead, alluding to art as something finite, or rather attempting to, is an injustice to its enormity. Art, for the sake of argument, can be personified as an intrinsic form of expression. In a thriving society, it is not optional. It is simultaneously a right, privilege, and necessity strewn together into one, as well as a daily happening and practice. The community behind it, artists, consumers, and critics alike, proves to be the centric voice in this debate, as the colliding opinions are all spoken from a place of concern for art and its relationship with society. To deeper understand this, I relied on observing the non-local scene around me to formulate my opinion on the utterance "art is dead." For I thought, at the very least, such a conclusive statement from my peers would hold some fraction of truth and weight, since it was so widely renowned. That truly there was some evident happening I would experience as well if all of our livelihoods could be so easily renounced. Yet, alas, the more I read, the easier it was to find that the statement did not come from logical pretense. Well, of course not, logic has no place in art, but rather a reoccurring state of panic. Man is simple in that when faced with the unknown, he recoils far, far into himself. Examples of this stem from the primitive discovery of fire to the creation of the first computer. While others found it innovative, invigorating, and exciting, the contrasting half, of course, immediately renounced it as the death of all things. This comedic carousel of invention versus man will continue to spin around until the end of time. In art, it is no different. Even in the most refined periods of artistic creation, doubt wedged itself into periods of change. Rewinding to a time where, say, Romanticism was favored and considered the pinnacle of creation, enters the boldness, while some may say bleakness, of realism and its antithesis to the prior movement. The absolute disdain for the latter was well documented amongst even the most indiscriminate of critics, and though we historically fear the mere mention of it, we can draw from this the fact that art is inherently ever-changing, and again met with the same fear during these movements. And despite the pushback, it breathes, exhales, rolls over, yawns, and laughs, screams, cries. It does all of this in its own soulful, eternal plight of being. This unwavable evidence of growth, however, does not stop the challenging notion that an internal matter is the cause of art's death. As established, art cannot be voided by any outside force. It would take the complete obliteration of humanity or the collective agreement of such for art to completely cease or truly be dead. Neither of these happenings are plausible in the immediate future, making the very argument in itself null. And though fearing change, as mentioned above, is a major part to the debate as a whole, art is not, and will never be, at war with itself, for its consciousness as a concept does not hold eternal malice. Would it not be absurd to ask Expressionism what it thinks of Cubism? Thus, speaking on behalf of individual genres and dead artists does nothing but create false narratives of the way things should be in art, creating an obscure Frankenstein thesis of which movement held the most quote-unquote value. For each genre in the world of artistry has contributed something indisputably great, and allowed the community to expand upon itself. Fearing some loss of meaning in art is a subjective yet parroted fear that when questioned often falls flat from over-referencing prior movements and personal failures to find a reflection of emotion in society in all art. But as change does not equate to death, neither does community to growth. To think of art and the community behind it as an impenetrable, exclusive force is an elitist ideal. Such an idea is held by artists and corporate buyers whose version of artistry is limited by its worth in cash, as their value is not in process and persons, but rather product. And as rampant capitalists funnel their money into this product, a grave infection spreads across galleries, the demand for more presented as less. Dots on canvas, singular shapes, solid colored canvases. Now heed me, I enjoy minimalistic art. I do not enjoy, however, the minimal effort most commonly perpetuated by nepo babies and industry plans to act as tax write-offs for billionaires. I do not enjoy galleries, big and small, closing their doors to artists, critics, and consumers alike. These rules all rely on each other in the grand scheme of community, as art without conversation would be taking away a vital aspect of its authenticity. What happens then is a plight of overexposure to one kind of soulless art, and when examining this, of court art would be proclaimed dead if nobody bothered to look past what the MoMA was showing. So to think of art and the consumption of such, exclusive to a certain class of protege, condenses its entirety. It does not belong to the tweed coats and the wine cars or the Oxford students as their pretentious hobby, much less an accessory to curated personality one can attach and detach. For there is no criteria to indulge in such a rooted aspect of humanity, and even though art is hardly justified as a casual, it still, at its core, needs to be accessible. Ultimately, art is not dead. It is very much alive and well. It hides in corners and closets, in the detailing of buildings and bottoms of coffee cups. We, artists, critics, and consumers alike, often project our own ideals onto the artistic community as fact, when in reality nothing about art is fact. Nothing about art, lest it be sculpture work, is set in stone. Instead of primarily focusing on this idea of death, we should actively be seeking life from these hidden corners. For when we are faced with bleakness and nihilism, criticism and corporate corruption, it is up to the artist to turn these things from stone to clay, into the water that wets our brushes.